Welcome in the Jock NBA Show. Midweek, we appreciate you hanging with us here on Awesemo. Hit that thumbs up button, please. If you haven't already, you're hanging with us. We'll remind you throughout. Don't worry. And look, if you're here ahead of time or you're here right on showtime, you're just eagerly anticipating everything that Geoff has to tell you coming up about how to maximize your return at Jock Market. Well, hit the thumbs up button, but also remind people as you see them coming in. We're all one big community, the Odd Shopper channel as well. Mike Awesemo is here producing. As I mentioned, Geoff's the star. I'm just hanging, brother. How you been?
I'm doing good, man. Yeah, no, busy week. Yeah, it's kind of like getting ready for golf and stuff and doing a little NHL. But I mean, this is an interesting slate. I think there's a lot of potential values we can be going over. Some more lopsided games, so maybe potential for some guys coming off the bench too. But I love this show. I love the Jock Market format, as people probably know by now, and ready to get into it, man.
Now, here is the $1 million question before we even begin looking game to game, et cetera. You have not one, but two Philadelphia honks on this show, including our producer, Mike. Are you really going to make us wait before we start talking about James Harden and the Sixers game? Like, are you really going to put that somewhere in the middle of the show and just troll me and Mike here for the next 10 or 15 minutes?
No, we can head there first. That's fine. I'm good with that.
Okay. I didn't want to just dive in there and be like, well, let's look at James Harden and the Knicks if you had ultra value elsewhere. So that was my non-selfish way of kind of just bringing it up.
I mean, look, yeah, James Harden, obviously, playing the Knicks again, went for like almost 80 fantasy points or around there the last time. But I mean, again, I mentioned the show talking about, guys who we can target for potential value tonight. And I mean, look, the Knicks side is kind of where we'll start with Emmanuel quickly. I mean, I don't see any reason why the Knicks, with just, who's out and, Kemba Walker not being with the team, why they wouldn't be trying to get him 25 plus minutes. And quickly he's been pretty solid in his last few starts. He's been well over a fantasy point per minute in 2 of his last 3 games, was like around 30 fantasy points the last time he played Philly. I mean, I don't know. I don't see any reason why this game wouldn't go sort of according to plan, which is just a big Philly victory. And I think quickly gets out there again. Again, he was one of the first names I wanted to bring up from just like a good value perspective, because I don't know if too many people are going to be like super interested in the Knicks side. I mean, I think obviously a lot of people looking to pay up for players, and there's more exciting probably teams than the Knicks to think about. So I think quickly is a guy you should be getting, think about getting some exposure to. His floor seems really safe. Like, I mean, even if it's a slower night, I don't see him like losing you bundles on Jock markets. So yeah, I think that's a good place to start in this game. I think there's a lot of players like with kind of a similar potential, but quickly is definitely one of my favorites like that.
Yeah, I love the angle, right? Because the easy option here is to attack James Harden and just hope that he's not heavily diluted from the public. But we also just have, like Joel Embiid is not sneaking up on anybody either. So there is going to be a lot of public favor, if you will, on the Sixers. Now, I think there are a couple of angles that are not those 2 guys that we can work with, but starting with the Knicks is probably going to be, from a field standpoint, one of the least popular plays. So we've already presented, I'm, piggybacking on your point here, Geoff, but you've already created some value here by looking at countering the field as well as guys out there. Somebody else that I would look at, and maybe he's somewhere in the middle between an obvious play like the Sixers guys and sneaking in there with quickly, but Evan Fournier comes off a really strong game against the Sixers. Sixers are good against the perimeter. Fournier still launches 11, knocks down 6, 24 points there. He is a guy that can get volume as well as can get hot. So if I'm targeting maybe not the obvious in Randall or Barrett and trying to find some middle ground there, maybe it is Fournier.
Yeah, no, I mean, I like that idea. I mean, look, we're for Jock market, it's what you're paying for a player, and it's the potential upside with that player. So obviously we want as cheap as possible. We want someone who's able to put up like potentially 50 fantasy points. I mean, not every player we target, like Emmanuel quickly, probably not a 50 fantasy point ceiling, but you get my point. It's all price comparative. I think Fournier, and this probably goes for most Knicks, maybe not Barrett, because Barrett is kind of the well-known name. And, he did go off like 2 games ago. So, Barrett's IPO got up last game. I expect he'll be somewhat heavily owned, but I think Fournier, I would agree with your take. I mean, from an IPO standpoint on Jock market. And again, you're bidding against other people. Like it's not a set thing like it is in traditional DFS sites. So the prices every slate are dynamic. And I think Fournier's price could easily come in just a little bit lower than he should be. You mentioned the perimeter stuff. I think just from a recency bias standpoint, people will look and say, the last 3 games haven't been that good. But Fournier, we can just take a look back over his last, I think 10 to 12 games. He's actually got three games where he's produced over a 200% ROI on Jock market. And, the downside, it's there with Fournier. I mean, if this turns into a blowout and he's cold, sure, he'll lose you most of your IPO's, money at the end of the night. But I like chasing that upside, and I don't think his IPO will get too crazy here. If it's under $5, I think that's a really good price for Evan Fournier in a matchup like this.
Anybody else on this Knicks team? I think there are a couple of angles on the Sixers to attack here tonight. And what should be, I think, a little more obvious to people that are paying attention, like yourself, for example, that may not be jumping out to people because of all the James Harden and also the MVP stuff with Embiid. But look, Tyrese Maxey is going to be in a really good spot for the rest of the year right now, because Tobias Harris's head from a scoring standpoint is just not there. The Sixers are not relying on anybody else outside of Maxey as at least giving him the opportunity to be a third scorer. Anything else is a bonus. Assists, rebounds, things along those lines. We know that he's going to guard guys out there as well, so there are steal capabilities in there. But the reality is that just as a third option on this team. So again, if we're not going after Harden, if we're not going after the obvious ones in Embiid, a quasi maybe less obvious one would be Maxey.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I mean, Tyrese Maxey, I think like just benefits from being around James Harden. I mean, I know it's, Harden is a usage guy and stuff like that, but Maxey's game is kind of just more, I think it just opens up the floor for him. I mean, I think he'll be more efficient with him with Harden on the floor long-term. And I don't know. I mean, like the Sixers have a bunch of guys we could kind of target for like blowout potential. Maybe they just get more minutes too. I mean, I've been trying to think about that for a lot of games because we have games like that on the slate, but I mean, you could go with like, I don't know. I don't really want to go too deep in this game. I think I threw out the quickly play. We talked about the Knicks side. I don't think you need to go too crazy. I mean, the Sixers bench is just too much of a guessing game. I think we'll leave it at that for this one.
Look, we got James Harden out without even talking about him. So the quota is hit. You've satisfied myself and Mike. We could move on collectively. So we thank you all there. A couple of high totals, though. And that Knicks Sixers total is at 223.5, 223, depending on, where you are throughout the day. But we do have higher totals on the board. And it looks like none higher still than that Kings Pelicans game. So some pretty good opportunities here to attack New Orleans at home, I would think, although they are a short 6-point favorite, but still with a 235.5 point line total, Geoff, we have to look at this.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I like the way the Pelicans have been playing lately. I think that, the CJ McCollum trade has made this team a little bit more formidable. I'm actually surprised to see this line this short, to be honest. Like, I kind of like the Pelicans side tonight, just to throw that out there. Take that for what you will. I mean, again, Brandon Ingram been playing pretty well. You look at him on Jock Market and he's not really like Ingram is a player you do not necessarily want to pay up for. I mean, he's the epitome of if you are paying too much for Brandon Ingram, he's probably going to disappoint you. But if you can get him for under $8, maybe around 7 or even under, and his IPO does fluctuate quite a bit because it is kind of like the story with Ingram where he'll tempt people in with a big night and then people pay up for him. They get disappointed. And then the IPO flushes down. And we saw 2 nights ago where I think it was around like $5 and he had a pretty good game and he had a pretty good ROI. But then the last game he disappointed against the Lakers. Like he wasn't terrible, but he didn't pay off. So I think you'll see Ingram's IPO potentially did drip again tonight. And he's not a player like I'd go all in on, with McCollum there, but maybe even a player to look at in game if you can get some cheap shares. I think that the Pelicans are going to put up some points then. I think Ingram is certainly in a good spot against Sacramento. So Jackson Hayes is another value play I think you could look at on this team. He's not like the most efficient fantasy producer, but the minutes have been really solid for him. And I think that's the bigger thing in this matchup. So Hayes is not like the top value play for me, but I definitely don't mind getting shares of him tonight either.
You think I can get 13 points from Hayes at even money?
Yeah, I think in this matchup you can. I mean, we've got a pretty big implied team total here. I mean,
yeah, it's hard to ignore that, right?
Look, and his minutes they've been really solid. I mean, he's played under 20 minutes once in his last 4 games. So I think you project Jackson Hayes for, at least over 20 minutes is pretty good right now. I mean, and the thing is, like, he's not the most efficient from a fantasy perspective, but the scoring has been pretty good. And like the usage when he's been on the floor has been pretty good. So yeah, I don't mind it. 13, right? Is the total?
Yeah, it's over 12.5 at even money. So it's hard. Yeah. And here's
I wouldn't be over. I wouldn't be going under in this matchup.
No, not at all. CJ, now look at this. McCollum 4+ threes is in like the 190 range. If you double that with McCollum 4+ and New Orleans to win, it bumps you up to +270. Bear in mind the Pelicans are -240 on the money line. Again, like his over-under is 2.5, but it's heavily juiced at -140. So you're basically looking at 4 at plus money. You can attribute the bump in attempts and even a make there to that higher total. You've got my interest peaked on this New Orleans game tonight. I'm going to be attacking it here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like McCollum's been really good for Jock Market, and the only thing I'd say for him too tonight is, just watch the IPO price. I mean, it got up like really big in his last game, and he did squeak out some positive returns, and he's been really, really good. But again, like the cat is out of the bag here, right? I mean, we're obviously talking about this game. If we're talking about the game and everyone knows it's a big point total, other people know that as well. That's why I brought up Ingram first, because I think the better deal tonight may lie with Brandon Ingram, especially for the Jock Market format. Again, like we're talking dynamic prices, but McCollum's almost at that point where you just keep playing him until he fails you, right? So
absolutely.
Both it's kind of developed. It's almost like the the shared running back situation right now in football with these two guys. They're both both really solid, but are they also stealing a little bit of thunder from each other? It might balance out a little bit here and take McCollum down, but I can see the argument there, as you mentioned too, like perimeter defense and stuff for Sacramento, like it isn't the best. So I'll lean Ingram, but this is it's really just like a more of a price thing.
It's going to be really hard to go over this point total if Sacramento doesn't just at the very least try and do their part, right? So we should be looking at a couple of guys on the Kings. You've had pretty decent games, even though he hasn't shot the ball exceptionally well from three, but still, I mean, he's not there. De'Aaron Fox to knock down threes, Harrison Barnes, Sabonis. So you can look at a couple of guys here to maybe target, and they did come off that super high scoring game against the Thunder, at least. So they do have it in them to take on a decent to bad team and put up points. So looking at Sacramento, is there anybody that you looked at targeting at least before we move on from this game?
Yeah. And again, like if you like this game to be close, I mean, you could take the points with Sacramento or something, and you could also target, one of these players on Jock Market. I mean, probably De'Aaron Fox. Again, he's not. Yeah, I mean, I like De'Aaron Fox just because his minutes are so solid, and from a Jock Market return perspective, it's been pretty good. I think you can look. I don't think you necessarily have to, though. I don't think you necessarily have to invest in the big players from Sacramento. A guy like Dante DiVincenzo down there, really, like just pretty solid minutes. Again, kind of like Jackson Hayes on the other side, getting 20 plus minutes a night. Can heat up from 3-point line. And he's actually been shooting it pretty well lately too. Certainly shot it well in his last game. I don't mind that. If you're playing for a close Sacramento Kings game or just a closer high scoring game, I mean, the Kings are probably going to need a guy like DiVincenzo to potentially like have a good game from beyond the arc. So he won't cost you much. Most people won't be looking there. I don't mind taking a shot with a guy down the bench from Sacramento, but I do kind of see this game going a little bit more Pelicans way. So my preference is probably just to maybe jump on like a Jackson Hayes or an Ingram from this game and play the Pelicans.
All right, anybody? So let's move on then. A couple of other higher totals that we don't want to ignore by any means. And look, just because there's a game at 202 or something like that doesn't mean that there isn't any value. Lowest total, by the way, is 217, at least Hornets Cavs. So let's move from the Jazz now to the Jazz Rockets. At least a couple of these games sitting in this range. Pacers Magic is another one. So I don't know. You what do you like? Houston at home is a serious dog as expected here. Double digits, 12.5, probably up to 13, depending where you're looking at it. But that totals 231. Pacers Magic is as bad as it sounds. It's down to a pick 'em at the very least, but it's two dog shit teams going back and forth with another ridiculous total at 232. So where does Geoff's mind work here? Are you targeting at least one good team in a high total game like Utah, or you want to find the value in that pile of shit in Orlando?
So this is where we're getting into like the more just guys. These games are interesting for the fact I think you can really start to look down the bench and you're going to find players who maybe won't even be that popular, but I think I've pretty solid upside. Let's start with Indiana. Isaiah Jackson, he's back. He's played 3 games in a row now. He's been over 20 minutes in 3 of those games. He's coming off a slow game. His first game back, he put up over 30 fantasy points in 23 minutes. And you mentioned, the point total and the two bad teams going up at each other. I mean, what do we need? 20 minutes might be enough for Isaiah Jackson to get off there. The Pacers are still super banged up. I think that's a player with really solid upside for Jock Market tonight. and a player who, you're just not going to have to pay up for much. Yeah. People focused on Halliburton and bigger names. I mean, I don't know. Halliburton, I think is kind of the cat's out of the bag, and he's solid, obviously, just in terms of his usage. But again, we're looking for a cheap investment, big returns, and I think a guy like Isaiah Jackson really kind of just sits well in that category tonight. I don't think you're gonna have to pay big money for him. So he was kind of the first name that popped out to me from that game, and I think these games we're talking about are good from that perspective, because you head to the Utah side, you're expecting a blowout. That means some guys down the bench are going to get minutes, man. I mean, like Hassan Whiteside. I mean, last game he played Houston, it was about 2 weeks ago, over 30 fantasy points in under 20 minutes. I mean, he'll probably get 20 minutes tonight if this one turns into a laugher again. And I mean, we saw how efficient he can be against the Rockets, how efficient everyone could be. So that's another name. I'm looking down the Utah bench. I'm looking for guys who might be able to produce for you. I think it's a good night to take a shot with a guy like Whiteside down there as well. Could be like a Jordan Clarkson night too. And I think the pay up option is, and the one that most people will be sort of looking towards, is Rudy Gobert. Mm-hmm. That's fine. Yeah, I think Gobert is going to be fine. I mean, but we're talking, we want to hit these guys with potentially, the double our money or double the IPO price. I think guys like Whiteside, Isaiah Jackson, really interesting spots tonight.
All right. So on that side, really, I mean, look, we have a couple of other games here, 11 minutes or so. So I don't want to spend too much time on that unless there is anybody else that you think is worth a mention as you get deeper.
No, I don't think so. Okay. I mean, the Orlando bench, the Indiana bench probably presents like the most opportunities we could go down. But yeah, I mean, you don't have to get too crazy and target like a bunch of people. I mean, Jalen Smith still in a good spot. I just like Jackson because I feel like, again, you've got to think about who are people really targeting. I don't think Isaiah Jackson's on too many people's minds tonight, but he was kind of getting big as a value target before he got injured, and then he just come back and he just doesn't seem to be having that much pop around him. I mean, the minutes haven't been big, but he's still a pretty efficient fantasy producer when he's been on. So let's move to where was the other game that?
The other game was Houston.
Phoenix Portland.
Phoenix Portland. Okay,
this one's good.
Yeah, let's do it, man. I can't bet Anthony Simons.
Actually,
there's sucked out.
There's so many tonight because I also want to talk about OKC Denver, which could be another blowout here.
We have 10 minutes, man. We can talk about whatever we want. Yes.
Let's start with Portland. I mean, what's the total here at?
I'll tell you right now. Updated total for this game here in PA is 223.5.
What's the spread?
11.
Why can't I find? Okay, it's 11. So I mean, yeah, obviously
this is blowout city without Chris Paul, right?
Exactly, right. Even without Chris Paul. So looking down the Portland lineup, I mean, we're do you want to pay up for Anthony Simons? You can do that again, but everybody knows like Simons is in a spot and Josh Hart are in these spots where they're going to get usage. It's no surprise you're not getting deals here. But you can look down the lineup, and there's a lot of names on Portland who have kind of been just mixing in. And I think Brandon Williams now kind of just playing like the backup position to Simons is starting to get pretty interesting. Over 20 minutes in each of his last two games. He's actually produced a couple nice returns on Jock Market. I don't see any reason why Brandon Williams doesn't get another 20 minutes backing up here, and potentially more in a blowout situation. So I think that's someone you can look at. Greg Brown, another dude, just starting to get mixed in a little bit more as the Blazers just try to look for somebody off the bench to kind of just, keep the court warm. So both those guys, cheap plays, I think you can be looking at on the Portland side. I don't really want to pay up for anyone on Portland tonight, if I'm being honest. I know we've talked about Simons and Hart, but it's just too volatile. These guys might get shut out of the building, ride the bench a little bit. They might just stink because they're playing a good team, right? So that's kind of my take on this game. Again, Phoenix side, is it a good spot for a guy like maybe Eytan to kind of sneak up with one of his bigger games? Sure. I don't know. I don't have a hot take on anyone from Phoenix. It's just one of those spots where, if you want to get on Devin Booker, you can, but I think most of the world is going to be there with you, and you're going to have to pay through the nose for it.
Yeah, the only thing I'm interested in now, as far as to further what you were bringing up with Phoenix, would be, if you could counter the field on, and I don't even know if it's worth it, so I'll defer to you, but if you could try and counter the field on either Bridges or Crowder, right? Because the obvious play is clearly going to be Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, because of the position. The matchup is going to get a lot of love there as well. I imagine both Booker and Crowder are going to get some looks, and not to say that they will be ignored tonight, but maybe that's where you can split a hair or two and find some leverage if it's two of those guys. And again, it may not be worth it. Like if the field is going to Bridges and you're left with Jay Crowder tonight, that may be a stay away as opposed to just getting his fair IPO price.
Yeah. And again, like Booker is a guy who, I mean, he's probably going to have a decent night. But I just feel like, you're looking at the top of the board, and it's not so much an anti-Booker thing, but you're going to be paying close to the same price for, for him, for when you have guys like, maybe De'Aaron Fox, who's potentially in like a high scoring game as well. And another guy we haven't talked about yet, but with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, potentially also like in a really high usage spot. So yeah, the Phoenix side is, I mean, there's going to be points. It's just, I don't know if it's worth it necessarily to try and figure out, who the non-Booker option is kind of going to be tonight. And if there is even going to be one. So.
Oh yeah. Look, and that's the thing is you don't have to force it on this type of slate. You mentioned a couple of other games you wanted to get to before we get out of here. Anything on that Hornets? That's the lowest total. So I just wanted to bring this up.
Yeah.
As far now, look, here's what I would say, because I'm always looking at this prop. I'm tagging you unnecessarily on Twitter, so I apologize. But look, you're verified. You got reach, so I'm trying to build my own thing here. The Hornets, we know launch, right? Like we know they shoot a bunch of threes. The Cavs over the last 3 games, and this is for everybody, the Cavs are 5th worst in the NBA in 3-point attempt percentage. And that's that's 4 percentage points higher. No, pardon me, 6 percentage points higher than their 2021 average. So over the last 3 games, it's like, if you want to take advantage of putting up some threes, you might as well do it. And we happen to be talking about a team in Charlotte who loves to launch threes. So that's a little angle right there. I know there's a low total, but that might be something to work with as far as just transferring over to Jock Market.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if I'm targeting, like a Charlotte player or something, I mean, it's probably like the guards. I mean, how many people are going to be on even just like LaMelo tonight? I mean, I don't know. Like it's one of those slates where most people looking at guards, we've already talked about Booker. I mentioned Alexander. I don't know, man. I mean, like I think LaMelo Ball is potentially just going overlooked. So
yeah,
I like this call. I mean, I like the idea of looking at both Rozier and Ball tonight for the simple fact that, again, we're talking Jock Market here. LaMelo Ball isn't like priced the same as Devin Booker, and he's probably going to be way cheaper in the IPO. So absolutely, man. I mean, the matchup you just laid out is makes it a lot more interesting, I think, from that factor. And I mean, that's just the weakness of the Cleveland Cavaliers defense. We also have LaMelo Ball. Like, we haven't mentioned the projections yet on Awesemo, which you should definitely go check out.
Yep.
They're pretty strong for Ball, if we're being honest. Like, he's right up there with McCollum. He's right up there with some of these dudes we've already mentioned. So he's actually above De'Aaron Fox, who a guy I could easily see him going for less than tonight. So this is why, on these, this is a really interesting slate the more we talk about it, because it's hard sometimes to find these really solid players like LaMelo Ball on a fast-paced team and to go overlook. But it does feel like in a spot against Cleveland tonight, most people are just going to not be looking at this game and kind of write it off.
Yep.
I like him. I like him a lot. I mean, I've kind of been lukewarm on a lot of the big names. I get it, but LaMelo Ball is a name I could definitely get behind tonight, and it all comes down to the IPO price. Anything,
just because I look at them from a narrower spectrum, if you will, or window, if you will, but from a cost IPO to return, is there any value with a guy like Oubre who is going to get shot volume?
I was actually looking at Oubre as well today. It's hard to get behind this game initially. You look at the players and it's like, oh, I mean, they're playing Cleveland. It's not a big point spread, but it's also a close or big point total, but it's also a close spread, right? Like, I think Oubre could easily see 35 plus here tonight.
Yeah.
I think it's a good matchup for him to do that. And again, I mean, I hate to just keep saying it, but it really does boil down to the IPOs. I don't think you're going to be paying through the nose for Kelly Oubre Jr. tonight. We look back on Jock Market, when the volume has been there, it's been pretty solid for Oubre, just of like in the short term. Long term, his IPOs were getting up, but you look at it, and I mean, you can almost just see the stock price on Oubre has been going down. Like the IPOs have kind of been going down. I don't see his IPO getting up tonight. He was well under $5 in his last one. So if you can get cheap shares of him, I don't mind it at all. You could pair him with LaMelo too. I mean, we've got a close point spread. I think both these guys will be playing big minutes.
All right, brother. Final minute or two here. So unless you want to give out an API winner, Lucas Glover or somebody along those lines, anybody else that you want to hit on tonight in a game that we did not mention?
So I've given enough horrible golf takes. You can head over to my Twitter at the Fantasy Grind for more of those. Let OKC quickly. Vit Krejcik getting more minutes here. He played 29 minutes in his last game. He got blowout city potential versus Denver. Super cheap. That was the one player from OKC, the one value play from there I wanted to throw out. Again, I think it's a good night to look at a lot of players like that. And Krejcik, looking pretty solid, man. I mean, nice. Just for in terms of how much usage he could potentially get with this game, and just with how banged up OKC is. We got like Lou Dort out again. I know Alexander is going to be handling a lot of that, but there should be blowout minutes for a guy like Krejcik again to get the floor. So
awesome, brother. Well, look, we'll do it again next week. And a reminder there, use our promo code. We keep telling you that because it's there for you. Awesemo. It doesn't change. You get a deposit now match. So you put in $50. We'll match that there at Jock Market. It's so easy to download the app, be part of the Jock Market community. We have these shows here for you so that you can follow along and build whatever you're doing on the app. With what Geoff is telling you, we have our projections, our fair IPO projections. They're on Awesemo. So really everything is connected. And that's why we want you to be part of that ecosystem there on the Jock Market app, because it's so easy once you realize what's going on and how you can buy low, sell high. So much of this is game flow. I know we talked a lot about attacking these games, but so much of that is in game as well. All right, my friend, I think that does it for us, and we'll do it again next week.
Yeah, man. Hope everyone has a good night. See you guys.
Luke List. See you.